Hi, and welcome to the Tahuya Tube top sewing video. Today we will sew every option that you can find in the Tahuya Tube top. We'll start with the basic tube top, and then we will add the chest flounce, and then we will add the shoulder flounce, as well as the optional tie. So to start off, I'm going to cut my pattern pieces out using my projector. I got to make sure it's calibrated properly, so I have my 1-inch grid turned on, and I'm just going to line it up with the grid on my cutting mat and make sure that it's calibrated properly, which it is. So now I'm going to turn my 1-inch grid off, and I'm going to turn my keep selected layer back on, and then we'll cut this fabric out. I'm going to cut my chest elastic out now. I'm using knit elastic. It's 1 inch wide. I don't have my model handy, so I'm going to go off the chest measurement here, and the direction says to use the chest measurement minus 1 inch. So that is my chest, and now I'm going to do my shoulder elastic for the shoulder flounce. So the direction here says to use a piece of 3/8 inch wide elastic, which I have here in this mess, and to use the shoulder girth measurement if my model is not handy, and for a 12-month, that is right here. For the basic tube top, our required pieces are 1 front and back, 1 bottom band, and 1 piece of 1 inch wide braided or knitted elastic cut to your model's chest measurement, or if your model is unavailable, cut to the chest measurement from the body measurement chart minus 1 inch. So to begin, what we're going to do is we will take our front and back piece and we will fold it right sides together. We will also fold the bottom band right sides together, and we will fold our elastic in half with the short ends together. Next, we'll take these pieces over to the sewing machine. For the elastic, I'll use my sewing machine. I'll use my serger for the front and back tube top piece, as well as the bottom band piece. Let's sew the front and back piece. I'm using my serger. I have the raw edges lined up. Here's the fold. I'm sewing the side opposite of the fold. The grain line is going like this. Now I'm gonna sew my elastic in half. Here's the fold, here's the raw side. I'm just gonna use a straight stitch. I'll hold my tails as I begin. Next, let's take our bottom band and we'll fold it in half with the wrong sides together. We're going to mark the side opposite of the seam with a pin. Let's also mark the side opposite of the seam on the front and back piece with a pin. Now we're going to insert the bottom band into the tube top, and we're going to line up the raw edges and we will sew it. Now that the bottom band is clipped in place, we can go over to the serger and sew it. I'm going to use my serger. If you don't have a serger, you'll use a stretch stitch for this seam. Here we are at the serger, and I'm going to serge the bottom band on. So I'm starting where my seam is, and I'll stretch from seam to my other mark that I made over here. Now that our bottom band is sewn on, we can work to attach the elastic. So fold your elastic in half at the seam and mark the side opposite of the seam with a pin or clip. Mark the side opposite of the seam on the tube top and mark that with a pin or clip. Now you'll insert the tube top into the elastic. I personally like to line up my seams. However, it does not matter. With the elastic ready to go, we're going to take this over to the serger and we're going to serge it on. We will gently stretch the elastic as needed as we sew from one side to the next. If you don't have a serger, use a stretch stitch for this step. If you choose to use a zigzag stitch, make sure your zigzag stitch isn't too wide and too long because that will prevent its amount of stretch. We're going to sew the elastic on. This side is my seam side. I have my elastic seam to one side and my side seam to the other side to create a less bulky seam. I'm going to turn this so that I am sewing in the round, which means my foot will be inside of the shirt. We are almost done. We need to fold the elastic over itself one more time so that it is enclosed inside of the tube top. So I'm going to turn my tube top inside out so you can really get a good look at what I'm talking about. With the elastic folded over, we're gonna go and we will top stitch the elastic in place so that it doesn't move. And in this step, you'll want to use a cover stitch machine or a different type of stretch stitch on your sewing machine, such as the zigzag. Likewise, make sure it's not too wide and too long because it'll prevent its as in the elastic and fabric's ability to stretch. And we will sew over our existing sew lines. Okay, so to tack the elastic in place, I'm going to use my cover stitch machine. This is a Janome 900 CPX. These are my settings because people ask, but really a lot of the times your settings are going to depend on the type of fabric you're using, and so these are not surefire settings. That's basically what I'm getting at here. All right. So when you're done sewing in the round, needles come up, foot comes up. We're going to pull these threads out right here. And then I use a curved pair of scissors to swoop under the foot, and then cut the threads. And sometimes you have to jiggle your needles a little bit to get this to release. And then once it has, you can cut your threads. And then you can tie a knot here. Now that the basic tube top is done, we can move on to our shoulder flounce. For that, we'll need our 3/8 inch elastic and then 2 shoulder flounces. I'm just going to lay these right sides together, lining up the straight edge. I'm also going to take my elastic and fold it in half and make sure that it's not twisted, and I also the ends together also, as well as these straight edges right here. And I'm going to use my sewing machine for the flounce because the edges on the flounce are raw, and if I use a straight stitch, it just makes for a nicer finish, I feel, at the bottom of the flounce. So let's go over to the sewing machine and we will sew this edge, and this side. Okay, let's sew the shoulder flounce. I'm using a straight stitch. My stitch length is 2.5. I'm going to start in my inner circle. I'm going to make sure that I hold my tails as I begin and also back stitch. If you forget to backstitch as you begin and you're starting from the inner circle, it's not going to be a huge deal because it's going to get sewn to the elastic, but you definitely want to remember to backstitch down here. Next, we're going to divide our elastic up into 4 separate sections, as well as our inside circumference of the flounce. And usually I'm not one for dividing things up into 4s, but for this I feel that it is helpful when sewing it on. If just dividing it up into 2 sections works for you, by all means, please do that. I just need a little extra support when I do mine. So let's start by folding our elastic in half at the seam and marking the point opposite of the seam. Now we'll fold it in half one more time, lining up the point we made with the seam, and we'll mark these 2 new spots with a pin. Okay, so our our flounce is already divided up into 2 sides, right? We have one side here, which is the seam, and one side here, which is the seam. Now we just have to mark center front and center back, because the seam is where the side of our shirt will be. So to do that, we just fold it in half at that seam. Mark it with a pin. I prefer pins, they're a little bit more precise. Okay, so there we have our 4 spots. Now we will pin or clip our elastic. I like to line my seam up with one of the seams. My seams I'm going to open up like this. As you pin or clip your 4 points on, make sure that your elastic is not twisted. Now that the elastic has been clipped on, I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm gonna base my elastic in place because like I said, I need the extra help. But if you don't, you can go ahead and start serging on your elastic or sewing your elastic on using a zigzag stitch. You will gently stretch the elastic from point to point until it's completely sewn on. Alright, so I'm just going to use a basting stitch and tack this elastic into place, because if I don't, with my luck, it will come loose of my clip and I won't sew it on evenly. So all right, we're gonna sew on the elastic. I'm gonna start at the seam. I'm gonna roll my needles up, get that under there, and I'm just going to work slow and gently stretch my elastic. I'm trying to keep these raw edges lined up. Next, we're going to fold the elastic in towards the wrong side and pin or clip it in place. Now we're going to top stitch using a stretch stitch or your cover stitch the elastic down. So again, you will stretch from mark to mark as you sew, and don't forget to back stitch. Okay, so I'm at my sewing machine. I'm going to sew the elastic down on the wrong side using my zigzag stitch here. My stitch width is 4.0 and my stitch length is 3. And I'm going to make sure my needle stops in the down position. That way when I have to stretch the elastic, it doesn't make my fabric shift. Let's bring our tube top back over, and we will fold it in half to find center front and center back. Remember that the side with the elastic is the top of the shirt. So fold it in half at the seam and then mark center front and center back with a pin or clip. Then take your shoulder flounce and fold it in half at the seams to find center front and center back, and mark center front and center back with a pin or clip. Now, if you're doing the optional tie, you'll want to fold that in half also. For the optional tie, you can use ribbon or some other tie material. So you'll want to fold it in half to find center. And then whichever side you decide is your front, you will kind of fold it up and then pin or clip it to the front of the tube top. And you can baste that in place. You can also pin or clip it inside of the shirt so it's hidden if you are doing the tube top option with no flounce. But for mine, I am not going to be doing the tie. So what I want to do now is insert the tube top into the flounce, lining up front and back, and I'm going to replace those pins with a clip. Next, I'll take it over to the sewing machine and I'm just going to tack the flounce in place by 1/4 inch on the front and 1/4 inch on the back. Okay, so I'm just gonna tack this in place. So now the shoulder flounce version is done. Begin by laying the chest flounce pieces right side together, just as we did with our shoulder flounce. We will sew the straight edges together from here to here and here to here. Okay, so we will sew our chest flounce here using a straight stitch. So I'm just gonna hold my tails. I'm gonna make sure my needle's down when I stop. With the chest flounce sewn, let's fold the tube top in half with a seam on one side, and we'll mark the opposite side with a pin. And this is the top, this is the part with the elastic. So what we want to do now is with our flounce right side out, we're just going to insert it into the tube top so that the raw edges lines up with the top of the elastic, and we'll line up the side seams of the flounce with the seam of the tube top as well as the mark we just made on the other side of the tube top. Pin or clip it in place. You can fold your seam to one side, or you can open your flounce seam up. It's up to you. Okay, so you just want to make sure that your raw edges are lined up, and now we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and we will sew the flounce to the top of this elastic here, and we'll use a stretch stitch and we'll gently stretch the tube top as needed. Okay, so we're going to sew the chest flounce on. I need a zigzag stitch. You don't want your zigzag stitch to be too wide and too long, because it will actually not be a very stretchy stretch stitch for you. So my stitch is 4.0 wide, 2.5 long. I'm going to start at my seam and then gently stretch from side to side. Now that our chest flounce is sewn on, we're just going to take it from the inside and fold it to the outside. And that is how you do that. And if you want to do the shoulder flounce also, just take your completed shoulder flounce. You're going to want to find center front and center back by folding in half at the seams. I'm marking those with pins because I feel it's a little bit more precise. Okay, and then folding our tube top in half to find the side opposite. So that would be the other side, if you will. And then you'll fold it in half again to find center front and center back. And you'll mark those points with a pin or a clip. And then all you have to do is insert your flouncy tube top inside. And then I'm going to replace my pins with clips. It doesn't need to be really precise for this step. Make sure your flounce is nice and pulled down. Now I'm just going to double check that. It is center front, center back. There we go. So now I can tack down right here and right here 1/4 of an inch. And if I were to do the optional tie, I'll sew that on afterwards. So let me show you how to sew this on real quick. Okay, so I'm gonna tack my shoulder flounce down. I'm going to make sure that these are lined up. I'm only going to tack it down about 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so if I want to do the tie, I would just fold it in half and find the center. So here's it folded in half. And there's center. And if you didn't want it to be tacked down, like you didn't want the tack on the front, you would just separate right here. You would want this underneath that seam right there. And you would move all of this stuff out of the way. And you would make sure that you just sew it to the tube top here. So there you have it. So there you have it. That's how you sew every option that the Tahuya Tube Top offers for your ties. If you don't like it, because it's raw edges, if you don't like it so wide with knit, you should use knit unless you're using something fun like lace. You can take it and stretch it, and it will actually tube itself. How cute is that? All right, thank you for watching, and please subscribe. Bye.